Welcome to the Best Little Town Podcast, your go-to source for everything happening in the town of Bedford's local government. Whether it's new initiatives or important decisions shaping our town's future, you'll hear it right here. Brought to you by Grove Street FM and hosted by Town Manager Bart Warner. This podcast is dedicated to keeping our residents informed and engaged.
Good Wednesday morning, Happy New Year, and welcome to the Best Little Town Podcast. My name is Bart Warner. I have the privilege of serving as the town manager of the town of Bedford and joining you today to give you an update on the latest happenings at the town council meeting and the activities of your town government in general. Last night, the council had their regular meeting in the county administration building, which is unusual and was necessitated by the fact that we had an issue with our elevator in the municipal administration building, and consequently we could not accommodate folks who might need to use the elevator to get upstairs. And I began my report last night by thanking our counterparts at Bedford County, the Board of Supervisors, staff, and in particular County Administrator Robert Hiss, for allowing us to meet upstairs in the Board of Supervisors board meeting room. I will point out that as soon as we knew we had a problem with our building, I reached out to Robert and also my counterpart, Dr. Mark Bergen, with the school system, and immediately they were both willing to do what they could to help us and to accommodate us. And, you know, that's kind of representative of the kind of community we have, and wanted to share that information with folks who maybe wonder about our relationships amongst each other. I can tell you at the staff level, we have no better friends than our counterparts at Bedford County and Bedford County Schools. And I made a point to tell Dr. Bergen that good neighbors are a true blessing, and we don't take that for granted. And that meeting arrangement last night is just a perfect example of that. So that was the unusual aspect of last night to begin with. Council began the evening with a work session on the zoning ordinance, and I know everybody finds that to be a super fascinating topic. It does actually have impact on every property owner and a lot of businesses and most activities within town, so it's an important undertaking. The background to that is the zoning ordinance that's in place right now was first implemented in the late 1980s. Now, we've made a lot of changes and adaptations over the years because obviously things change and the world we live in is not the same as it was in the 1980s. But even with those, we felt the need to kind of reformat the document itself to make it more user-friendly. In the process of that, there are some specific issues that are lingering that council talked about. And specifically last night, they talked about short-term rentals. This is, it's a new thing, but it's really not a new thing. It's very similar to a bed and breakfast use, which maybe people don't use that terminology much anymore, but the town has always had regulations that said that single-family homeowners could rent space for guests who are not relatives. And the way we do that is to have public hearings, public input. They have to be approved by the Planning Commission and the Town Council. With the advent of Airbnb, vacation rental by owner, really the marketing aspect of that, there's been more attention to that. And so the term short-term rental applies to those things, but again, it's not really anything new because in zoning terms, it's been the same thing as the bed and breakfast regulation that we already had. So the Planning Commission has been working on this for at least a few years. Council has reviewed what they've done. Ultimately, last night, the consensus of council was to move forward with the language that's been presented by the Planning Commission. There was also an issue with setbacks. And when I use the term setback, if you own a piece of property, you have to locate your main building a certain distance from the front, side, and rear lot lines. And that term is called setbacks. That is a big issue in regards to density and the way things happen and are developed. There have been a couple of historical issues where we've had setbacks that are different than what would be proposed in the new ordinance. And so council addressed an issue there and have given us direction on how to fix it. Signage is also a component of the zoning ordinance. And on a personal level, I will tell you, boundary adjustments are my least favorite thing to address professionally. The sign ordinance is probably a close second. Great discussion was held about digital signage. Currently, the town only allows digital signs primarily on the 460 corridor. The Planning Commission has talked about that several times over the years and about allowing digital signs elsewhere, but there has been concern and frankly resistance to the notion of doing those in historic areas such as Centertown. So that's another area that council discussed last night. Another aspect of zoning is subdivision regulation. Basically, when new developments occur, it happens through a subdivision process whereby a piece of property that's multiple acres is broken up into streets and housing lots for new development. A lot of issues there related to the impact on the community. A lot of that deals with traffic impacts as well. And there was a discussion about the fact that these things typically happen off of existing streets and roads, and should council talk to developers about requiring multiple points of access. The issue there is if you've got one way in and one way out, and you have a lot of houses using that point of access, it could create stress on the existing neighborhood as this development occurs. So good discussion by council, taking it very seriously. I will say the zoning ordinance itself probably will be addressed again by the Planning Commission. Council will take it up again. There will be certainly another public meeting and a public discussion that's not been scheduled for a specific agenda yet, but please keep your eyes and ears tuned to that because it will be coming up. That work session began at 5:30. The regular meeting commenced at 7 o'clock p.m. And jumping into that agenda, I did report a few things and wanted to make the community aware as well. There is a warming shelter being offered through March 20th, each Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 112 Center Street. So for those folks who are, facing unfortunate circumstances or having issues with your home heat and you need a warm place to spend the night, you can go to 112 Center Street Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. Also, a lot of interest has been expressed about the progress of the Bedford Middle School redevelopment project. Dave McCormick is the gentleman who owns the building and is conducting that development. He is providing tours to members of town council as well as members of the Economic Development Authority on January 17th. I'm also pleased to report that I have received a preliminary timetable document for proposed completion of that entire project from Mr. McCormick, and there will probably be public discussion of that coming up before the Economic Development Authority and Town Council in the months of February and March. Dave is running a little bit behind, as everybody's aware, but we're seeing activity there. Some of the supply chain issues seem to be working themselves out. I can report that he believes with great confidence that the project can be completed by spring of 2025. And when I say the project, just as a reminder, the old brick building that was the main classroom building will be converted into market rate apartments. The stucco building, which a lot of people affectionately refer to as Old Yellow, will be converted into a boutique hotel. That's somewhat related to other development in town. We do have a business class hotel that should be breaking ground up on Burks Hill Road at the foot of the D-Day Memorial within the next month or so. We know that that will be a Hampton Inn and that it will feature a business convention center. What people may not know is that Hampton is revising their floor plan and their generally refreshing the appearance of all their hotels The one in Bedford will be the first one that will be constructed with the new specs that they're developing. So we're excited that they're coming into the community, but also excited that we're going to have the first, the best, and the brightest in terms of their new format. Also wanted to report that a lot of people remember we unfortunately had a fire downtown about this time last year at 112 South Street. That was the building where the Sister to Sister boutique and restaurant was located. I'm pleased to report that demolition activity is finally moving forward on that property with the idea that the burnt parts will be removed and there will be a complete rebuild of that property. So as much as we wish we had avoided that tragic fire situation, we will be getting something built back, and it's not a situation where we just have an outright loss. Once that demolition activity and construction activity begins, there will be the need for some random sidewalk and street closures in the block of South Bridge Street between Main Street and Washington Street. We will handle those administratively through our building official, Public Works Department, and Police Department, and do our best to communicate with the neighbors there and all the citizens. There may occasionally be some street closures associated with that. Again, you probably could count that as growing pains somewhat. Bedford is on the cusp of a lot of new development proposals that are coming in, and those things will start coming out of the ground. And once they're built, we'll enjoy them, but in the process, there may be a little bit of inconvenience, which we'll do our best to mitigate. On an administrative note, I want to remind everybody that town offices will be closed on Monday, January 15th, in observance of the holiday honoring the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Last night, we had a couple of citizens who appeared before council to share some information with us. One was Mr. Danny Kirby. Danny is a former long-term employee of the city and town with the Recreation Department. He passed along the sad news that our former colleague Fran Hart, who was a director of recreation back with the city of Bedford, recently passed away. And Danny shared, in addition to a tribute to Fran and her work, and I will tell you personally, I had the pleasure of working with her at the beginning of my tenure here as well. Also, Danny provided some background information into the operations of the old rec department and Liberty Lake Park. And in particular, he shared information about the Christmas displays that we put up in the park, and the fact that Fran came up with that idea back in the 1980s. So it's good to know why we maintain certain traditions and where they came from. In the case of the town's decorations, we did that to kind of complement what was being done at the Elks Home. And another former employee of ours and colleague, Mr. A.C. Fuller, assisted Fran with that because he used to work at the Elks Home. So if you ever wonder about some of the things that happen here and why, there's some interesting history to be found, and we would certainly encourage you to ask those questions so we can all benefit from them. Also, Ms. Jane McKeon spoke to council, sharing concerns about the short-term rentals that we just talked about after their work session, provided some good insight and some good data for town's consideration. We appreciate both folks taking the time to appear before council. In fact, I will note that as part of the meeting last night, Mayor Black specifically pointed out that this council wants to be as transparent as possible. I can tell you that this council wants to communicate directly as much as possible. So let me take this opportunity to invite you to come to our meetings. They're the second and fourth Tuesday of every month, usually in our upstairs council chamber, unless otherwise posted. But also, please contact us at any time. The main number at Town Hall is 540-587-6001. You can reach me by email at bwarner@bedfordva.gov. If you have a question or there's something on your mind, please let us know. And don't be bashful about that or think that your issue isn't important, because chances are if you have a question, there's at least a few other people that have that same question. Let me double back to a report on the elevator. Again, the reason we had to relocate our meeting was because the hydraulic system in our elevator, which was 30 years old, finally gave up the ghost. Our contractor was on site yesterday, has replaced the part, and is currently testing. And as superstitious as I am, I will report that we think that problem is solved and we can resume our regular operations and meeting schedule. But I'll let council know that directly once I am assured that it's going to work and nobody gets stuck on the elevator. Moving back to the council agenda and the meeting last night, a couple of council members also offered additional comments of their own. Newly elected council member Daryl Updike shared his observation of the way things had been with council meetings before when he first started attending them, I think back in the 80s. And those are some good insights and good advisement. I'd encourage you to catch the recap of the meeting on YouTube. Mayor Tim Black also recognized with sadness the passing of 4 individuals in the community who had made a tremendous impact during their time here. One of those was Ms. Beulah Payne, who was an educator and had a tremendous impact on, well, pretty much everybody she touched in the community, from my understanding. I'm also sorry to report that Harry Leist, who was the owner and proprietor of Old Liberty Station, passed away. Mr. Paul Sherman, who had a distinguished career in education for many years and who was the first basketball coach at Liberty High School, has also passed away. And also Ms. Marie Powers. So appreciate the fact that Mayor Black mentioned those titans of the community. We mark their passing with sadness, but we are also very grateful for their contributions and would ask that you would consider their families and loved ones in your thoughts and prayers as well. Mayor Black also announced that he will be hosting a community engagement meeting this Saturday morning, January 13th, at the Oakwood Villas Clubhouse. That is located off of Oakwood Street, directly behind Bedford Memorial Hospital. And I believe the starting time for that is 10 o'clock. Tim said 9 a.m., but I believe the notices have been posted stating a beginning time of 10 o'clock a.m. I would expect that Tim will be there at 9 if anybody shows up, since he's the one who made that announcement last night. And with those matters on the agenda covered, council then moved on to its new business matters. The first item of new business last night was the appointment of Todd Stone as fire chief. The Bedford Fire Department has a somewhat unusual relationship to the town and community in that it is technically both fully a town department, but also a volunteer organization that operates in conjunction with Bedford County Emergency Medical Services. As part of the regulations governing that, the chief of the fire company is elected from within the membership, but town code also says that town council must acknowledge and appoint the fire chief as well on an annual basis. Mr. Stone was elected by the membership of Company 1 back in December, I believe, and council pretty much ratified that last night. And we appreciate the services of Chief Stone and all our volunteers and all our emergency service personnel. One thing people may not be aware of, and I'll allude to this with the next council item, is the level of service that we receive is rated by many agencies, one of which is the Insurance Services Organization. They rate fire coverage on a scale of 1 to, I think, 10, 1 being the best score, 10 being conceivably the worst. Bedford Town and the area served by the Bedford Fire Company currently has a rating of 2, we have a rating of 3. We're about 8 points shy of receiving a rating of 2. 2 is the best rating possible for communities that do not have career fire departments. So the ability to reach the level of service we have is testimony to the great service that our volunteer companies provide, the effort they put forward, and the responsible way in which they do that. And I want to make citizens aware of that because, frankly, not too many people know about it. But a lot of our services are analyzed by outside people on an objective basis. And what we find more often than not is we're doing very well based on those metrics. The next item of new business was also related to the fire department and the apparatus they maintain. The Bedford Fire Department and the volunteer fire departments in Bedford County all have certain vehicles and equipment that they need in order to achieve these high service levels and ratings that we all enjoy. Those have a lifespan to them, and there's an active replacement schedule for all of them. In the case of Company One here in town, there is a ladder truck that serves the town and basically gives us the ability to get up high and address fires when they occur so that they can be contained and might not be nearly as catastrophic as they otherwise could be. It's a very expensive piece of apparatus, which leads people to question the value. But Chief Stone mentioned last night the examples we have of the value of that are the fire we had at 122 South Street last year, also the middle school fire. The fact that we were able to get on top of that and our folks were providing excellent service meant that instead of losing a great icon in our community, we were able to preserve the structure and it can be redeveloped. That fire back in 2020 was one of the low points, I think, for the community, but the bright spot there was because of the investment in apparatus and the work of our fire personnel, they saved the building. In fact, at the time, I remember a firefighter came to me on site and was apologetic and said he was sorry that they weren't able to save the brick building. Turns out they actually did. And so to that individual and their colleagues, we appreciate that, but we also need to make sure we provide them with the tools to do that. That's all background for the fact that the current ladder truck that we have is 17 years old, and in terms of meeting National Fire Protection Association standards, we really don't like to keep those beyond an age of 20 years. Now, the issue with the ladder truck is it's a large, complicated, and expensive piece of apparatus. All that said, it takes about 3.5 years right now to get one. So knowing that we will need one July of 2027, we need to place that order right now so we can get in the pecking order and get that thing produced and get it online and have it delivered. It's also a pretty expensive piece of equipment. The current cost quoted is $2.2 million. I will tell you that we have planned for this eventuality within the town service. We also have a arrangement with Bedford County that's very beneficial and another example of great cooperation between our governing bodies, whereby the county contributes some costs to that as well. In addition, the volunteer fire department does what they can to offset costs. What I'm pointing at is the $2.2 million is almost completely covered at this point. The town has $900,000 dedicated to that purchase in a few years. The county will also contribute over $900,000. The manufacturer of the truck will give us a trade-in value on the old truck worth $150,000. So we are aware of the fact that these things are expensive, but we always do what we can to economize as much as possible. All that said, we needed to lock in that price because as much as these things are in demand and there are supply chain issues, the quote we received was only good until January 16th. After that, we would have until July to place an order, but it would be $200,000 more. So council ultimately authorized Chief Stone to execute a purchase agreement for this ladder truck at a cost of $2.2 million to be delivered by July 2027. And we do think we have the financial aspect of that covered. And also we look forward to maintaining the high level of service and maintaining that particular piece of apparatus within the repertoire of the fire service. The next item on the agenda related to what is referred to on the plat and in the lease agreement as Edmund Street Park. Many neighborhood residents know it as the Ball Diamond. That is a neighborhood park that is located adjacent to Susie Gibson School, down at the end of the terminus of South Bridge Street. And of course, it fronts on Edmund Street Park, so there's that reference. This has been a really valuable and cherished part of our community for generations. What's odd about it is it has actually been the property of the Bedford County School Board all along, and the town has leased it since 1974. The current lease is scheduled to expire December of 2027. Town council and town leadership decided that it would be worthwhile to approach the school board about obtaining ownership of that property because, again, the town leases it, maintains it, and the town has an interest in making improvements to it. And based on all those factors, we thought it made sense for the town to own it. And cooperating with Dr. Mark Bergen, his staff, and the school board, they agreed, and we've worked out something that will allow the school board to sell the property to us for $10. And in exchange, we will provide some maintenance services for the park itself. We'll commit to maintaining it as a park, but we'll also provide some mowing services for the adjacent athletic field, which is not going to be part of that deal. Again, we think it was kind of a win-win all around. The town also will be soliciting neighbors' input and citizens' input into what you would like to see at that park. I can tell you our plans are to complete the resurfacing of the ball courts there. The basketball court, part of it's in pretty good shape. We'd like to extend that to the entire surface. We'd like to make improvements to the pavilion. We'd like to improve the parking. But we'd also be interested in hearing about what else you might like to see there. Last night, council authorized the mayor to execute and deliver that purchase and sale agreement to the school board once we get all the surveying issues worked out. Edmund Street Park, or as it's more affectionately referred to, the Ball Diamond, will be part of the town's parks and recreation offerings. Another item of business last night related to the town's attempt or interest in purchasing some property to develop a solar power generation facility. To give a little background on that, there's a couple of reasons why the town is interested in pursuing this kind of facility. We already have one in place on our, what we call the old landfill out on Orange Street. And that generates, on a good day, maybe 5% of the power that we need. But the good thing is it's at no cost to us. And in fact, it offsets the costs that we have to purchase other power. So any way that we can generate our own electricity locally keeps our costs down and keeps the citizens and customers' bills down. So that's important to us. Also, anyone who's paid attention to the political and regulatory environment knows that we are all being directed to pursue green energy options to the greatest extent possible. And in fact, there are probably some mandates coming down that we're trying to get ahead of. I can tell you that with our current solar power facility, as well as the Snowden hydroelectric project that we've operated for over 100 years, we are well ahead of the current mandates established at both the federal and state level. But again, we want to be as proactive as possible. That is all background to last night's discussion, wherein we have identified a couple of parcels off of Macon Street that may be ideally suited for this purpose. Council is in the process of negotiating with the private owner of that property. And basically those discussions are ongoing. Also last night, there was an item that was originally scheduled to be discussed in closed session, but since there really was no burning need for that to be a closed door discussion, council decided to go ahead and move that to the open session. And that is dealing with a discussion of the ownership of parcels of property near the Stony Creek Reservoir. Back when the city was in the water business, Stony Creek Reservoir is located high atop above the current city limits at the base of Flat Top Mountain. It's basically an impound where mountain streams form a really lovely body of water there, and a really pristine body of water that was our main source while we were in that business until we created the Water Authority and merged our operation with them. It still contributes a significant amount of the water used by town customers, but that is regulated by the Water Authority, and frankly, the exact content of that is frequently blended with other sources. Be that as it may, that's the background. When the town got out of that business and merged and set up the Bedford Regional Water Authority, we transferred all of our facilities, including parcels directly on top of the water surface at Stony Creek Reservoir and in some adjacent parcels. In that transaction, though, there were still some parcels retained by the town, and current staff and the town attorney are trying to assess some of that because there are some irregularities that we're trying to figure out. One of which is one of the parcels we retained is actually located adjacent to the spillway of the dam and in the river, and it's landlocked. And while there was probably a really good reason why the previous city attorney and maybe the mayor who signed that executed that agreement, we don't know what that logic is today. So the water authority has actually approached us to raise that question. Last night, council acknowledged that that particular parcel probably makes more sense to be in the possession of the water authority. There are other large tracts adjacent to and on top of the reservoir itself that may also make more sense to be governed and owned by the water authority. So council in open session, this discussion all took place, authorized staff and the town attorney to engage with the water authority to basically figure out what they need for their operations and what makes sense. There has been some speculation and frankly a little bit of misinformation out in the community that there is an intent to sell these properties to private concerns. That was a discussion that was held briefly and privately, but has no legs and has no interest for this council. Frankly, the approach at this point is to make sure that the water supply at Stony Creek Reservoir is maintained appropriately and protected. And I think it's fair to say that we want to work through the water authority to determine what the best course of action is first. So that was the discussion last night. And there were a couple of other minor housekeeping items that were discussed in closed session, but nothing to report outside of those. So that's the nuts and bolts of what your elected officials did last night. I neglected to mention there was an organizational meeting back on January 2nd. Tim Black was reelected for another annual term. Well, another term as mayor. C.G. Stanley was reelected as vice mayor. Council has an organizational meeting after every election in order to elect their administrative officers. Unlike other communities that will elect a mayor directly, the mayor and vice mayor in the town of Bedford are chosen from within the membership of the elected council, and that meeting takes place after every election. We just had a special election based on the boundary adjustment, which took place last year, so that necessitated this meeting. There is another regular election coming up this November in which there will be 4 seats on council that are open for people who are interested in running for them. I'm saying all that to let you know that we will have another organizational meeting in January of 2025, but from that point forward, it'll be a matter of every couple of years. So a lot of people have asked sometimes, why we don't elect the mayor directly, and that's basically driven by our town code, and that's the way we do it. Also at that meeting on January 2nd, Councilman Todd Foreman and Councilman Darrell Updike were sworn in. They were the people who were elected to council in the last election. And so last night was their first full meeting. We had some good attendance at the meeting. Again, I want to thank our colleagues at the county more than I can say, and also at the school board for their willingness to help us. Ideally, we will be back in our regular format on January 23rd, back in the municipal building. I would encourage you to attend those meetings. I would encourage you to check all of our communication outlets, which are sponsored through our partnership with Media Squatch, formerly Watts Creative Services. Woody does a really good job of putting together some things to keep you informed. I also want to mention that he's working on at least a quarterly newsletter that we want to share with people to provide even more information. And if you have not provided your email address to him, please follow our social media outlets and our website to see how you can do that. Again, communication is really, really important to us. We appreciate the sacrifices that our citizens and our businesses make, and we want to make sure that we are cooperating, communicating appropriately to minimize the negative impacts of that and to promote the good things that are coming down the pike. And it was mentioned a lot last night, and I'll reiterate it. There are a lot of exciting things happening in Bedford right now. There are a lot of development proposals that we know about. There are a lot of individual homes being built on random parcels throughout town, which has been a little bit unusual in our history, but is an indicator, in my opinion, that things are changing. Bedford is growing. And I think that's because people are discovering that it is, in fact, a really great place to live. In our opinion, we continue to believe it's the world's best little town, and we will do what we can to preserve that. And if we fall short, we'll do what we can to reclaim it. In any event, that's our goal moving forward. So we want your input. We want your participation. We appreciate it. And candidly, if we're doing something wrong, tell us that too so we can fix it. Again, I hope everyone has a very healthy, safe, and productive 2024. I think there are going to be some really good and busy things on our horizon, and I look forward to sharing in that new year as a citizen myself. Thanks for listening, and God bless to everybody else.